The link for the 7 session slides you can just find from where everything is. So where we have uploaded all these slides and recordings. The slides for session 7 are already there. And so session 7, 8, or session 8 also. My bad. Yeah, Samantha just linked it in the chat. The exam will consist of 40 multiple choice questions. If you take the exam through the official slot on Friday, you have 1 hour for it. There is one question about the Q&A comments and answers. Unfortunately, Zoom doesn't really allow to publish that easily or access it easily. So we don't have those available, unfortunately. The alternative time, you'll get an email for it, but I'll discuss it in like 2 minutes when we start the session. The exam, the normal slot is on Friday. So if you want support throughout the exam, I would recommend to take it tomorrow, to take it Friday when we have the normal session. But if you don't have time for whatever reason, because maybe you're in a different time zone or whatnot, then you can take it at another date. This Friday, yes, session 10. It is indeed 1 hour. If you pass the exam, you'll see right away if you've passed it. Is it an open book exam? Well, there is not really a book, but if you have access to the slides and whatnot, theory, it's similar. So can indeed be open book. 90% pass rate is indeed a really high mark, but you need to know this stuff. So we like to set high standards. I think we have good amount of people now, so we can get started. So I hope you can all see my screen. Can you see the summer school PowerPoint? Just to make sure. All righty, perfect. One more question from Deidre. Does it start at 2 p.m. or later? I plan to start it about half hour after the start, and then it's like 1 hour. And Abdullah, we have indeed already checked in some better software solution, but this is the first time we're running this kind of summer school, so maybe for the next time. All righty, let's get started. The session today will be mostly about the theory of a different type of certifications. So what can we help with? How do you do it in the software and whatnot? If you have some questions, please again use the Q&A part. I'll try to keep an eye on it also, but my very talented moderators, Antti, Sean, Samantha, Rosa will be answering questions if needed. The recordings and slides are already available as well. If you click on the Summer School Resource Hub, you'll already find the recording from yesterday, but you'll also find the slides for today already. So if you want to check them. And I clicked it the wrong side. So if you want to discuss One Click Lca or anything regarding the summer school, please join our user group on LinkedIn. Feel free to discuss there. We're just making a post. So yesterday there was the session which was done by Marius, one of my colleagues, and he discussed mostly about the stuff related to import. So the automated way of getting data towards One Click Lca, which can save you time when doing your actual LCA. So he showed a couple of different type of plugins. So we looked at Revit, which is a building information modeling software. We looked at IES, which is an energy modeling software. and Rhino and Grasshopper, which are more of a parametric Lca. I think he also did a demo of an Excel and Revit import, and it was indeed one of the homework assignments, which was, I think, listed as mandatory because it gives you a good idea of how to do this type of import. Of course, in the earlier session, during session 3 or session 4, I've already showed the import process as well. So it's important that you at least know the steps of how you upload, for example, an Excel file. Import through these kind of more automated softwares like Revit and IES or ArchiCAD, they can be a lot faster, but they can also be a lot slower depending on the quality of your model. And if you know how to master at least the Excel uploads, you'll already have a step. You're already basically a step ahead of some of the people who might not know that. So that's quite important. There were a couple of requests from the previous sessions. So I already mentioned last time also, we have extended the free license to the end of the month. So if you want to play around with One Click Lca a bit longer, you can do that. There were some questions about if there is possibility for a discount or whatnot if you want to get the license. So there will also be some options for that. I yet have to discuss that a bit further with our sales team, but I'll give you some update on that tomorrow. And then there was, of course, also the request, can we take the exam at a different time because we're in a different time zone, or there's some people who have been displaced due to the situation, for example, Greece and whatnot. Fortunately, my PowerPoint isn't really showing too nicely, but if you go to the resource hub, there will also be now the option to sign up for an exam at a different time. If you cannot attend the session tomorrow, or my bad, Friday, the exam, just sign up there and we'll send you an email with how you can do the exam anywhere in the week after. So there's not going to be a specific time for it. You'll just get a link which you can access the exam with, and you can do the exam. I will just trust you that you do it on time. So today we'll be talking about different types of certifications. So what kind of certifications are there in the realm of building Lca? How can you do them with One Click Lca? I'll show you a couple of examples of some case studies, and we'll have a Q&A section. Probably the talking part will be a bit less long than the previous days. I'll try to talk for maybe a bit over an hour, and then I can do a bit longer Q&A, for example. So we support a lot of different types of certifications. We try to aim to support pretty much anything that our clients, or any certification that our clients are doing. So if you have a type of certification or regulatory system in your country, which is related to Lca or carbon studies, we probably support it. On our website, you can also find all these certifications. So if you're not really sure what is relevant in your country, you can just click there, you can find it, and you can see if we support it. If you're on our website and you navigate to the software part, which is the first kind of tab there, you'll see that first of all, we divide it in 3 different sections. So we'll talk about different type of Lca for construction projects, which also includes the normal life cycle assessment, but for example, also the circularity, it includes carbon designer, so the early carbon optimization, and a couple of other things. We then, of course, also have modules for product Lca. There are also certifications there if you, for example, want to do an EPD, which is not really what we'll talk about today, but I'll cover it shortly. And then we also have a section for example, corporate stuff. So greenhouse gas reporting, CSR tracking, these kind of things. When we are talking about the building Lca, we, of course, help with most of the certifications, but also we kind of like supporting our tools which support these certifications. So when we do building Lca or carbon studies, we usually want to get the emission values, but sometimes you might want to do life cycle costing or circularity or anything like this. So we have a set of different type of tools which you can use for building and infrastructure Lca. For the product Lca side, we specialize in tools which are for the construction industry. So we offer product Lca and EPD tools, which basically help manufacturers record the emissions of their products, which you then as a consultant or building Lca or carbon studies consultant can actually use it in your building Lca calculations. I see that I'm speeding up a bit. I'll try to talk a bit slower, my bad. So one of the other suites of tools we have as well is the greenhouse gas reporting. So with this, you can get an overview of all the projects you have. So this could, for example, be interesting to real estate or investors or things like this, or perhaps record the emissions over your entire value chain. So that is kind of not, how do you say, restricted to the realm of construction industry. It can of course be much broader, but if we have clients who are doing, for example, also building LCA and infrastructure LCA, they can gather all this type of data in for greenhouse gas reporting. So when we talk about the most popular certifications in the world, there are of course a lot of them, or there are a lot of type of different schemes which are there. And we try to support most of them which have some kind of impact as well. If you guys are familiar with the embodied carbon review, which we have released a couple of years ago, we took a look at about 130 different systems. So there are not 130 different tools, but there are still a large number of different type of modules. When you're on our website, the first part, which I showed earlier about the software, that's really about the different types of modules we have. But under the use cases tab, you can also find out what we can actually help with. We have the first section, which talks about achieving certifications. So if you have a building that you want to certify according to a certain certification scheme, like BREEAM or LEED or Dgmb, we can find all that here. You can also click directly on this link, and it will take you to the entire overview of all these certifications. But you could also be doing this to comply with regulations. So perhaps the reason why we are doing building LCA is not because we have somebody who wants us to do BREEAM. It's because the law actually says we have to do building LCA, otherwise we cannot build. And those options we can of course also help with. So we can also help you comply with different type of regulations. So what are the most popular ones and which ones can you actually do in One Click Lca? So if you're kind of new to building LCA, I'm sure that you have at least heard about BREEAM and LEED. BREEAM and LEED are the most common, bigger certification systems, which are pretty much done anywhere in the world. BREEAM was, of course, originally coming from the UK when we had the BRE, and they have, of course, BREEAM UK. But there are a lot of national schemes as well. And specifically BREEAM International, we can pretty much cover any credits which are related to the materials. So we have them, for example, the BREEAM International New Construction 2016, which is very common, which is done pretty much around the world. If you have already opened these slides, you can also click on these links and it takes you directly to where we should go to. We have then, of course, LEED. LEED is originally from North America. It's made by the US GBC, but LEED can also be done around the world. LEED is also quite commonly done in Europe, but the biggest market for LEED, I assume, would still be of course, the US. We have Dgmb, which is the German original system, but the Dgmb also has an international version and a Danish version. They are all quite similar, so they are all working in quite similar way. There's one question already: is levels of certification or regulation? Levels is a framework. It's not really regulated yet, but it might be in the future. Dgmb does not have to be in German. So the Dgmb international tool is completely in English. Dgmb Danish one is, the guidance is also completely in Danish. So of course the German version, that one is in German. We then also have some other different type of certifications which can be done. For example, the Living Building Challenge and the Zero Carbon certification. These ones are definitely not mandatory, and in both cases, they are really sustainability at any costs. So they are not just because you want to get a fancy certificate that, okay, we have done a building LCA. It's really the lowest possible emissions, the best performance of the building from an environmental point of view. So these are kind of the international ones which are done. There are, of course, other options as well, like they could be doing Dgmb in Asia as well, if there are certain reasons for it, but commonly these are the ones which are done internationally. Then we have the Nordics. The Nordics is already a bit different situation when it comes to certification, because most of these are actually also regulation, or they are becoming regulation pretty soon. In Norway, we have, for example, the Norwegian standard 3720, which is a carbon study, but it's mandatory for all public buildings. So if anybody builds a school or a hospital or anything like this, they have to do an LCA for it. And in Norway, there is also a lot of local regulation. So you also have municipalities who are coming up with these type of regulations. In Norway, we also have an iteration of BREEAM, which is called BREEAM Norway, which is very similar to the NS 3720 and also very similar to BREEAM International. but it's a carbon-based study normally, depending on the credits you're trying to get. We also have Future Build, which is quite new. The tool is, I'm not sure if it's already out or if it will be out soon, which is a kind of bit more extreme version of the NS3720. So yeah, Norway is quite, how do you say, a leader in these things because they have been doing this already since 2018 or 2019. And every year the standard is being tweaked a bit. In Finland, we have also a regulatory method coming up. Currently, it is listed that this will start in 2025, but they're already busy with this quite a lot. They have already done pilots and stuff. I will cover that more in a bit. We have some other options also like the RTS or the Green Building Council Finland schemes, but they're not as done as much as the YM method. In Sweden, there's a number of different things you can do, but the regulatory method will be the Klimatdeklaration. And that will come in force next year, if I'm not mistaken. We also have MB3, or called Miljöbyggnad. We have Noll CO2, and we have BREEAM Sweden. So the Klimatdeklaration, the Miljöbyggnad, and Noll CO2 are all carbon schemes. They have a variety of different type of scopes. For example, the Klimatdeklaration is just A1 to A5, but some of them are a bit different. And BREEAM Sweden is kind of like BREEAM Norway. It's an iteration on BREEAM International. So it's quite similar. Denmark is then a little bit different. They have one kind of national scheme, which we don't support because it's only supported by a government tool. But then they also have Dgmb Denmark, which is a tool we do support. Dgmb Denmark is more like a whole building LCA, very similar to Dgmb Germany or Dgmb International. But the local regulatory one, which is using the government tool, I cannot say too much about, unfortunately. We have also then a variety of different type of European certifications. Not all might be relevant for you, but there is quite a lot of interesting examples in there. In France, where they have done this kind of stuff for quite a long time already, we have the Energy Carbone, or E+C- as they call, which is a carbon study, which is quite specific in what it does. We have HQE, which is more like a full building LCA. We have Bâtiment Basse Carbone, and we have the new RE 2020. The RE 2020 will actually be the regulatory tool, which will be mandatory from 2022, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, any building that will then be made, regardless of the size, there are some building typologies which are excluded, have to do LCA or have to do a carbon study. In the Netherlands, we have a system called Milieuprestatiegebouwen, or also called MPG, which is a carbon study, or in a sense, it's a carbon study. It looks at a value of global warming potential per square meter per year, and more on that in a bit. And we have also BREEAM Netherlands. BREEAM Netherlands, in essence, is again an iteration on the BREEAM scheme, but in the Netherlands, it uses one database. So it's quite unique from the others to that extent. In Germany, we have, of course, Dgmb, which is the main scheme there. You also have BREEAM Germany, which is an iteration on BREEAM. And we have the BNB, which is kind of an iteration on Dgmb, but it only allows use of one specific database. In Austria, you have UGNI, which is quite similar to the above schemes. Then in Spain, we have Verde. Verde is kind of like a carbon study which focuses on, well, there is a certain scope, but it's not so special. You can do this in almost any carbon tool, and it uses worldwide data. Then we have also a tool for Switzerland, which is not used a lot, but it's also an LCA tool, basically. Yeah, so these are the main ones we have on the Europe continent. This, of course, does not include England. I'll cover that in a second. We have then the UK, and in the UK, we have quite advanced type of assessment we're doing. So we have, of course, traditionally BREEAM UK, which has different type of iterations you can do there. We also have the RICS and the GLA, the London Authority, the Greater London Authority, which are quite extensive carbon studies of whole life carbon, where you really include a lot of different type of materials. We also have the impact tool. The impact tool in BREEAM UK is used for certain projects. So if you're doing, for example, an office project, they want you to benchmark your project against data from the impact database, which is a database which is managed by the BRE. We also have the home quality mark, and there's a methodology called TM65 for including MEP or building technology services into your assessments, which you can also do. In Ireland, there's also this thing called the Home Performance Index, which is also a study which you can do with One Click Lca. We then have North American schemes, and the North American schemes are not as advanced as one might think. I mean, for a while, they kind of denied climate change there. But in North America, we mostly do LEED. It's the most common certification scheme done there. We also do Living Building Challenge. And in Canada, there's actually a couple of other things upcoming, like the Canadian GBC Zero Carbon Scheme, Toronto Standard, and the Waterfront Toronto Green Building Requirements. There will probably be new schemes or new regulatory things coming pretty soon in the US, but it's yet to be seen. Like, we don't have so much insight on that already. Then if we look at the Asia Pacific and African regions, there isn't much. So the only type of mandatory LCA, or not even mandatory, it's actually all voluntary, which is done in Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. There are certain schemes in, for example, Singapore or China, but the extent of adoption is kind of unsure. Green Star is more like a whole LCA. So you can compare it very much to, for example, BREEAM International, where you do an assessment of pretty much the entire building. So Green Star originally was made in Australia, but it of course was adjusted for New Zealand since it's pretty much next to it. And in South Africa, we have a version of Green Star as well. Then there are infrastructure certifications. So infrastructure is not really something we cover too much throughout this session, but the basics of infrastructure is very similar to building LCA. It, for example, uses the exact same data. It can have same type of indicators, but just the layout of how you do an assessment might be different. So from an infrastructure point of view, there's basically 4 certifications you can do. We have SQL, which is a iteration of an infrastructure scheme done by the BRE. So it's kind of coming from BREEAM. We have Envision, which is most done in North America. We have PAS 2080, which is the first specialization for managing whole life carbon in infrastructure. And then we have a tool for the HS2 project in the UK. So there were also quite a lot of requirements for that, that specific project. We then, of course, also have product certifications. So we support the EN and ISO standards if people want to release EPDs. So product LCA, where they create EPDs, which can be used in building LCA. And depending on the tools you use, there are different standards we support. We have basic EPD tools, like carbon study tools. We have EPD generators, which generate a set of results according to certain standards. For example, according to the EN 15804A1. And we also have a pre-verified tool. And that pre-verified tool generates also results according to the new EN 15804A2. So basically, we have quite a lot for different type of applications in the construction realm. Then we have regulations. So from a perspective of certification and regulation, certifications are usually not mandatory. So it's more that people do this from a voluntary point of view. But regulations are there so that people have to comply with them. If people don't comply with them, they can, for example, not get a permit to build, or they just cannot get a permit to build, for example. We have different type of regulations available already, which have either just become live or have come live in the last couple of years. In the EU, we have the EU taxonomy, which is something which has to be followed for certain products or buildings. So if you want to find out more about this, you can click on these. These things won't be in the exam, by the way. So these are all really high detailed regulations, which we're not going to be discussing too much in depth. In the UK, we have the London Plan. Any type of large scale construction in the UK or around London has to do a whole life carbon assessment and circularity statements. So that's quite massive undertaking there. In France, we'll have the RE 2020, which I kind of forgot to add here, but it will become mandatory pretty soon, where all buildings, or at least office, residential, and retail buildings have to do an LCA, regardless of the size of the building they're going to be building. We have in Sweden the Klimatdeklaration, which will be a new building mandatory regulation starting from 2022. We have then in Finland the YM method. So this is in Finnish called this, well, I'm not even going to pronounce it, but YM method, it's easier. It's a construction footprint limit values which are introduced. Currently, it says by 2025. So yeah, that is already in pilot phase in Finland as of today. In Norway, we have the NS 3720. I previously said 2019, but it's already mandatory since 2018, it seems. So again, if you want to click on the links, you can go there. And in Denmark, it's a bit different, but there will be a mandatory calculation for construction projects in 2023. So the current system in Denmark is that it uses this government tool. So we don't support it as of now, but it's possible that very soon we will support it. So when we specifically take a look at the Nordics, and why? Because we're quite far ahead of the rest, actually. Sweden has this climate declaration, which will be mandatory pretty soon, 2022. Denmark will follow a year later. You can also see what the different type of things are doing there. So while in Sweden, this mandatory climate scheme will be in 2022, it will also limit the values from 2027. So basically to ensure that we are always getting better type of buildings. The Swedish system also uses a specific method, which uses the Boverket database, and we are already supporting it. In Denmark, we have this mandatory calculation from 2023. And this basically means that any building which is over 1,000 square meters, they will have to reach certain limits, or they cannot go over certain limits. The tool there is not completely ready yet, but I assume that soon we will support it also. In Finland, we have the YM method, or the Ministry of Environment method, which basically has carbon footprint limits for buildings. So you cannot go over a certain limit. Currently scheduled for 2025 to be ready. And we have supported this tool already from the beginning, because of course we are located in Finland, so we are quite active in the cooperation with this. In Norway, we have the scheme, which is ready since 2018, but there are a lot of cities and municipalities who are also introducing LCA related methods. The method there is the NS 3720 method, and we have been involved in the development of this one also since the beginning of 2018 or 2017 even. In Iceland, not really sure what they're doing there, but it's definitely not ready yet. So unless they have the regulatory systems checked out, we cannot really help them there yet. So how can you actually do this in One Click Lca? So now we'll discuss these kind of in short, in-depth sections of why do you have to do this and how do you do it in One Click Lca. So is there a certain scope? Do we have certain data we have to use? And is there anything that might be interesting for you to know about? So first of all, if we talk about the most specific or the most popular ones, and then we have, of course, the BREEAM International or the national BREEAM schemes also, and LEED. So these are the biggest ones. There is, first of all, a lot of credits in these schemes. So we support certain credits, like if we have the example here, the BREEAM International New Construction 2016. That specific BREEAM scheme is basically the one which almost everybody is doing. If there are national versions of BREEAM, they're usually a variety of the International 2016 scheme. The biggest credit we have there is the META 1. So the META 1 is your normal LCA. If you do an LCA for BREEAM, you get points. If you include the minimum mandatory scope, you can at least get those points. There are some other credits you can also get, and depending on different type of schemes you do, you might be able to get them with the software. There are, for example, material durability or material efficiency, lifecycle costing, waste management, or energy performance, these kind of things. There's a question about these credits, but I won't go too deep into them. If you are familiar with BREEAM itself, then you probably know that there are a lot of credits. So BREEAM itself is not just life cycle assessment. It's also, for example, transport, waste, health, safety, and all these kind of things. So both in BREEAM and LEED, a massive scheme which has a lot of different sections, and LCA is basically one of them. And we're talking, of course, about those sections because we can help with those. There are some other BREEAM credits you can get, not directly through us, but through a cooperation with us, and that's through energy modeling. We have a partnership with IES, and basically then there are also other type of credits you can get. So you can see another 27 on at least those 21 from the LCA point of view. And that is, for example, related to the management of things, energy modeling, so the heat credits or heating credits, and also more energy credits. BREEAM will also be covered more in depth in session 12. So next week, when 4 of my colleagues will still do specific certification sessions, they will talk more about BREEAM credits. So if you want to know more about that, Ravi, I recommend to join the session 12 next week. I won't be doing it, but my colleagues will be glad to tell you more about it. BREEAM in general in the software is quite easy. When we do a type of assessment for BREEAM, we basically just take our data we have, we import that or input it to One Click Lca, and we get the results report. So there's nothing else we have to do there. There is a mandatory scope of materials we have to report on, of course, like the structure, the envelope, these kind of things. But basically, if we have that, we fill it in our Meta1 calculator, which is a calculation tool from the BRE, and it tells you right away how many credits you get. So carbon reporting, as accurate as possible. If you ever have the chance of starting with an LCA project, BREEAM International is a really good one to start with. So as you see here also, the mandatory scope is listed in the Meta1 calculator. So it's a calculator you can get from the BRE if you're doing this type of projects, where you just check the boxes for what kind of elements you have included. And if you have included the right elements, it right away also tells us the credits we get. BREEAM itself uses, or at least our BREEAM tools, are all pre-verified by the BRE. So we cannot change them. We have to get them verified. And if they're verified, they're listed also in the Meta1 calculator. The data it uses there is worldwide data. So if you have any EPDs from around the world, you can access them. Our BREEAM tools, however, as it's more common to have it in Europe, they use CML data. So they don't have data from North America. There is not all data that you can use, however. There are some generic databases like ICE in the UK or EPIC in Australia, which are only carbon values. And carbon values from a BREEAM point of view doesn't work. Because as you see here also, this is an example from the result page of BREEAM. We have in BREEAM global warming potential, but we also have acidification, eutrophication, ozone depletion potential, and all these mandatory indicators. So even though you might have just some carbon data, it cannot be used in this case. With BREEAM, it is also so that if you're trying to get your credits, the more you include to the scope of your assessment, the more points you get towards your Meta1 credit. So if you, for example, also include external services, you include paints, perhaps you include the building technology and whatnot, you get more points for it. And the more points, the more credits you get. So as I said also to Ravi earlier, this will all be covered more in depth in session 12. So if you want to know really more specific about why to do BREEAM and why to do LEED, join that session then, and that will be very, very useful. Pusherart asks, does the LCA have 60% or 70% influence on the BREEAM certification? Not that much. I'm not exactly sure what the percentage is, but it is significant at least. The idea with these kind of certifications like BREEAM Elite is that you cannot just do an LCA to get your credits. You really have to look at multiple aspects of your project. So we would also have to look at energy efficiency. We also have to look at health and safety or waste management or whatnot. So you cannot just do an LCA and get all the points. I mean, you can try though, but you won't get enough points. Then the next one we have, the bigger one after BREEAM, is LEED. And LEED is originally from North America. So when we do LEED, we do an LCA assessment, kind of just like BREEAM, but there is a bit more extra steps. So depending on what we're trying to do, you can just do a normal LCA, just like BREEAM, but you only get 1 credit for it. So it's the easiest step. If you want to get more points, you have to do comparisons. So we actually have to make 2 designs, one which has our baseline. So a building which is typical for construction in our area. So let's say typical office building in Helsinki here. And then I have to make an as-built design. So the design I'm actually trying to build and compare them with each other and check which one is better. Of course, the as-built design has to be better performance-wise. Depending on what you're trying to get, it could, for example, be that it has to be 10% better performing, or 15% or 20%, depending on the credits we're trying to go for. When we do lead, there is a bunch of different type of credits you can get. And the most common one is the Mrc1 credit we see here. The Mrc1 credit is available for the lead BD plus C, but you can also do it for interior design, so ID plus C. And depending on what you're doing, there can be other credits you can get as well. We have, for example, the Mrc2 credit, and this one is related to EPDs. So if we're taking products, or if we're including products in our assessment, which are locally sourced or are covered by EPDs or are specific enough, we can also get credits for these. So there's different type of credits we have available there. There are also some pilot credits, and I won't cover those too much today, but perhaps Joanna will cover them in the session on the 12th. So LEED is kind of like BREEAM, but with one extra step. So you still have the data you first importing. So we can do this through building information models. We can do this through cost plans or anything like this. But then we have to make a baseline design. So we have to create that design, which has a building which is typical for our location. We then have to make design alternatives. So this could be our as-built design or design options or whatnot. And those have to be performing better than our baseline design. If we are just wanting to get one credit, we can just skip this part. We can just do our baseline design and we can already get 1 point for LEED, under LEED 4.1 at least. But if we want to get better, we have to make these options and we have to argue why our actual building that we are making is better than the typical building we have. We have to create a report for this. We have to send this to the USGBC, and then we can get points for the LCA related credits for LEED. When we are looking at the scope of materials for LEED, it's a bit more limited compared to BREEAM. So when we do BREEAM, we have a mandatory scope of materials, which is quite similar to the structure and envelope of LEED. But in BREEAM, you can get more points by doing more. So the more of the building you include, the more points you get. In LEED, it doesn't work that way. So if you include more, it won't help your score at all. So it's better to just only include those mandatory scope of elements, which are the structure and the envelope. You can use worldwide data, EPD data, of course, and we have to have more values than just global warming potential. So if they are basic type 3 EPDs, we'll also have the ozone depletion potential, the acidification, and all the data for these different indicators. If we are doing local sourcing, we can also get points for the EPD credits. And we basically have 2 or 3 iterations of the LEED tool. So we have the LEED International tool, and the LEED International tool uses CML data. So basically any type of data which is, well, not from North America. Then we have North American tools. So we have the LEED US tool, which uses Tracy data, but is in imperial settings. And then we have the LEED Canada tool, which also uses Tracy data, but is in metric settings. And Tracy data is the EPD type of data, which is only in North America, or at least it's mostly there. So the main part here is that we do our assessments. We do this comparison. So we have that compare button, which is normally up here. And you can actually see if your design is done better. Then, of course, we have to document this in our report, and that will be used then. And Tron is asking, the US has their own separated database? So this kind of relates back to session 2, when I talked about the theory and we talked about characterization methods. So around the world, you basically, there's multiple, but you basically have 2 main characterization methods, and this is CML and Tracy. So in Europe, pretty much everybody publishes CML data. So it's data where the emissions have been characterized according to a certain way. And in the US, they just wanted to do it different, so they have Tracy. So in the US, you mostly have access to Tracy data, and anywhere else in the world, you have access to CML data. Tron also asked if the data for generic comparison is publicly available or in One Click Lca. If you just talk about our database, you can see it in One Click Lca. But most of the data is, of course, publicly available on whatever EPD platform it's published on. So if we then go away from LEED to the next one, we would have Dgmb. So Dgmb is also an international certification. Dgmb is a bit different. It's not, from an LCA point of view, it is also a full LCA. So it's the same as, for example, BREEAM and LEED, but you don't have to make multiple designs necessarily, but you have to compare your data according to reference values. So in LEED, we have 2 credits, the ENV 1.1 and 2.1. Yeah, not much more that I can actually say on that. Just like pretty much any certification scheme, you should do it as early as possible because you can still affect something. And the processes between Dgmb International, Dgmb Germany, and Dgmb Denmark are quite similar. So if we have the scope of Dgmb, there are some changes in how Dgmb calculates versus other tools. So there are different type of scopes. So if you want to know more about it, I recommend to check on our help center and just go to the Dgmb International articles because they have different type of calculation methods. You can, for example, do a simplified calculation, but then you get a score markup of, let's say, 20%, or depending on what you're doing. Also, when we look at the different lifecycle stages, it takes them a little bit differently. So we, for example, take the global warming per square meter per year. It does include also B4 and B6, but it doesn't include C1 and C2. And we have D also reported separately. One thing you cannot see here is, but there's also this reference building performance. So once you have done your assessment, just like any normal LCA or carbon study, you have to fill in your reference values. It will have a separate query for those. And basically it then checks it according to certain Dgmb lists. Dgmb also has a couple of parameters which are different. So it does not allow for the service life values we normally have. So you have to use product specific service life values. So anything that the EPD says our product will last this long, you have to use this. It also has specific end of life settings. We cannot use end of life settings that we do in other projects. They have to use their own data, which is coming from their system and probably UKBA data in that case. So the kind of method of how to do an LCA is the same, but there are a couple of extra steps you have to do, which are specific to all the Dgmb tools. Continuing on the international certifications, we of course also have the levels approach. So levels is a framework which was coming out of pilot probably like 4 or 5 months ago. It has been piloted quite a long time before that. It is not mandatory yet, but it can already be used. And basically in levels, we have 3 different type of approaches. So the level 1 is basically a conceptual design. We can do a really early phase assessment. It doesn't really matter if it's for a whole building or anything. And you can do that with pretty much any tool. So in the summer school, you have access to the levels carbon and the levels LCA tools, and you can use both for basic level 1 assessments. Level 2 and level 3 then get a bit different. So they are already becoming much more detailed. Level 2 is basically done at REBA stage 4. So when we are in the detailed design phase of our project, so the last things are being drawn up or we are already building our building. And in those cases, the assessment would already be quite detailed. And you can also find more about levels if you go to our help center and search for levels. The levels 3 one, this one is actually when the building is already built. So this is already much further than level 2. And this would also include all the emissions for the construction site operations. So that's the A5 lifecycle stage, if you remember, and also any operational emissions. So energy, water, those kind of things. So those would all be included there already. There was one question about the reach of recipe. Recipe is not really used in these type of building LCA studies, but they could be used in, for example, product LCA. It's better if you have some questions to put them in the Q&A part because I don't always see the chat constantly. So how do we do levels? Of course, levels should be kind of familiar to you if you have now already used One Click Lca a bit, because levels tools are actually available in the summer school. Levels tool, the kind of what you're doing depends on what you're trying to get out of the software. So the levels carbon is just a carbon tool, and it on the result page will just have global warming potential. It will also have biogenic carbon, but it doesn't have any of the other indicators. If we're doing the levels LCA part, we'll have quite a lot more. So we'll also have all the other indicators, and depending on what you're trying to get, basically depends on what type of levels approach you're going to do. So are you doing the conceptual phase? Are you doing the detailed phase for level 2, or are you doing post-construction, so level 3? So levels is quite straightforward in use, quite similar to how you would do an LCA for example, Braham. Dima asked if we can do Dgmb calculation in India. Yeah, you can, if you want to, but then you would have to use the Dgmb international version. Then we have another kind of global certification, and this one is quite different from any other ones we have. And that is the Living Building Challenge or Zero Carbon. These type of certifications are not mandatory at all, but they are really sustainability at any costs. So when we are doing living building certification, it also, as it also says here, it has to be that you're designing regenerative buildings, which are basically improvements on everything there. So it has to be positive for the lighting in the building, the air, the nature, the community around it. The buildings have to be self-sufficient, basically only using resources from close by, and they have to have a positive impact on the environment. Then there's also another scheme from the same group, which is the Zero Carbon Standard. And that one is maybe even more difficult. It basically means that all the energy which is associated with the building has to be offset, as you see here also, by either new or off-site renewable energy, and also 100% of the embodied carbon emissions. So any emissions related to the construction of the building and the materials have to be disclosed and offset. So those kind of things are not cheap to do. This is really like sustainability at any cost. So if you want to know more about them, I recommend to check these links. I put them here also, and they go to the right to both of them. They are indeed great certifications, but they're definitely not done enough yet. Yeah, they can be done in pretty much any of our carbon tools we have. Henry asks, has there been any building that has gotten the living certification? There definitely have been, but I cannot tell you right now which one they are. I am sure that if you go to the Living Building Challenge or the Zero Carbon websites, just follow these links here, that you can find them there right away. So then we go on to Nordic certifications. So specifically the Nordic certifications I'm talking about now are the NS 3720, the Klimatdeklaration, and the YM method. And why am I doing these is because they are kind of the furthest ahead of the different schemes we have in the Nordics right now. These will also be discussed during session 14. So next week on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, my colleague Fernando, he will be talking about specifically these schemes. So if you're in either of these countries or you want to know more about how they're doing it in Norway or how they're doing it in Sweden or Finland, I would definitely recommend to join that session. These are perhaps a bit more advanced than the normal type of schemes. They go a bit further than, for example, Braham. But yeah, if you want to know about these, definitely check them. So as I said earlier, the NS 3720 is a regulatory method in Norway. And that's the one which has been mandatory since 2018 for any type of public building. It has quite a broad scope. So it, for example, also looks at operational transport, B8, which is quite unique as compared to other certifications. The Klimatdeklaration is the regulatory method which is upcoming in Sweden, and the YM one is the method in Finland. So all of these are carbon tools. So they all look just at global warming potential, or perhaps also biogenic carbon. But the life cycle stages they report on are a little bit different. There are also other tools in the markets there, though. In Norway, we also have Future Build, which is kind of an iteration on NS 3720, a bit different. In Sweden, we also have Nold CO2, and we have the Miljöbyggnad. So those are all carbon tools as well. In Finland, we all are in Sweden, my bad. Klimatdeklaration also makes use of the Boverket database, which is a regulatory database which is published there. And in Finland, we also make use of the Syke database, which is, again, also a regulatory database, which is typical for Finland. And of course, Boverket is typical for Sweden. So this will be covered more in that session 4. So if you want to know more about why they have regulatory data or how they're doing it, definitely join that one. How do we do these assessments in One Click Lca? So most of these have a specific scope, and probably it's better to check what it actually includes. And they're all quite different lifecycle phases wise between the different tools. Most of these access worldwide data. So they access the basic CML EPD database, but there are two tools, which are the Climate Declaration and the YM tool, which have regulatory databases. So in order to get actually credits, in Sweden, you have to use that Mrc database, and in Finland, you have to use the Suke database. I have one exempt here, a result screenshot from the NS3720 tool. So this is the Norwegian standard one. We can see that global warming potential is the only indicator we look at. We also have biogenic carbon, and they actually also have land use and land use change. So land use and land use change is one of those things which is, if you remember, also coming in the EN 15804A2, but it's actually already there in the NS3720 tool. They have that B8 operational carbon, as I said, which probably I haven't really filled it in correctly in my project here, but B8 emissions can be really big, of course. It really looks at all the emissions from transport towards your building and back from it. So that can be quite significant. So yeah, NS3720 has been done for quite a while now. So we have a lot of clients who have been doing a lot of carbon studies for Norwegian projects. Then we have different type of European schemes, but I'll first cover the French one, because the French one is a bit different. In France, there will be regulatory method coming as well from 2022. And they have been trialing with different type of carbon studies with the Énergie Carbone or E+C- tools for a while. So this will be covered much more in depth during session 13, so next week. If you're in France or you're looking at perhaps doing LCA studies for France, I definitely recommend to join that one. So the most common ones in France have been so far the Énergie Carbone, which is the pilot credit, and HQE. Énergie Carbone was a carbon credit, and HQE was more like a full LCA. From 2022, RE 2020 will become the regulatory method. So anybody who does residential, office, or educational buildings, and it doesn't matter what the size is, they have to do an LCA, and it has to reach certain threshold limits. So these kind of regulatory actions are, of course, great because it forces people to do LCA, which is the only way we really can make sure that everybody actually does LCA. It's best if it's put in regulatory purposes, basically. So how do you do this RE 2020? It kind of works also a bit different. The French system is a bit more complex, and I won't go into very heavy things for the French stuff. If you know how to read French, you can check these articles. Unfortunately, the articles we have on RE 2020 Énergie Carbone are only in French. So the French system uses, first of all, different type of data. So the data they have is partly also available in other tools, but they only use one database, which is the French INES database, but they do allow certain custom EPDs, which are in the same format of INES to be uploaded. Dieter asks, he's a bit confused. No worries, you don't have to know all about these certifications. Like, it is more as to give you a general overview. If you're not doing LCA in France, I don't expect you to learn about LCA in France. It's more that you know what is out there, that if people do throw up terms, that you kind of know what you're talking about. The French system, as I said, it also looks at different type of lifecycle stages, and some of their data points are not A1 to A3. There can also be data points in the French system, which are, for example, A1 to C4. So they are recorded in a different way. They are also added differently to the different result categories. So we have, first of all, just the climate change, global warming potential. There we have kind of similar scope as most of them, but it, for example, also includes refrigerants for HVAC machinery. And then we have the other indicators as well. There are some other things which are still coming underneath there, but that will be explained in the session 13. Then other countries. So there are different type of certifications which are there, of course, also. The German Dgmb this one follows the same process as the other Dgmb tools. So when I talked a bit earlier about Dgmb International, there's not so much difference there. It's one question if the Canadian French work to read these articles. Honestly, no idea. The French tools, they kind of have all their own set of requirements. Most of the users that are using our software who do the French stuff are French. So that I think that is also the reason why probably all the guidance we have for the French parts is only in French. The other tools we have, the UGNI, BNB, or Grau Energy, they are not used as often as the others. One could speculate that it could be because there is no regulation in those countries. And when LCA or carbon studies are mandatory, they are definitely not adopted to the same extent as when it becomes regulatory, basically. Most of the country-specific versions of BREEAM are quite similar to BREEAM International. So they might have their own manuals, of course, but the scope of the materials, for example, could be the same, but they could have slight different things. For example, if we compare BREEAM International versus BREEAM Norway, in Norway, you have a BREEAM credit, which is just carbon, even though normally BREEAM is full LCA. If we have the Dutch system, this is the one which kind of deviates from it. In the Netherlands, we have the MPG, or we call the Milieuprestatiegebouwen, which mandates using one database, the Dutch NMD database. And also the BREEAM version of this one, BREEAM Netherlands, only uses that database. So you cannot do anything else. So it's also, yeah, quite unique to that extent. So talking about this specific one, there are, of course, minimum scope of materials, just like pretty much anywhere. What I'm always saying, if you want to find out what is the minimum scope of what I have to include for my assessment, check the manuals. We have in our own workspace here at work a lot of different manuals, probably like hundreds, which all talk about specific schemes and what you actually have to include in those. The Dutch system only uses one specific database, so it's to an extent similar to how the French do it, but it doesn't have as much data as the French database. So we have there the NMD database, or as we also call it, the National Environmental Database, National Milieu Database. We basically have to perform an assessment there. And in the Dutch system, it's also, again, slightly different. We don't look at the total cost. We look at the cost per square meter per year. So similar to the French system, there will be threshold values per square meter. And if you go over that value, you cannot get a permit to build. So I think the value currently has been set to 80 cents per square meter per year. So yeah, if you don't make that, you basically don't get a permission to build. So in a sense, it's quite good. It's a very powerful way of making sure that people do LCA. And we would want to have more of these kind of systems, of course, around the world. I think now it actually is already 5. So maybe let's say we have a 5-minute break, because I see that there's a lot of theory that I'm pushing out here. So let's do a 5-minute break, and I'll be back with you in a bit to talk about the other stuff. So yeah, be back in a second. All righty, that has been give or take 5 minutes. So there have been some questions in the chat that it's quite hard to follow everything. Well, just don't worry about understanding everything here. This session is really just to give you an overview of everything that's out there, which is relevant from a building LCA or carbon studies point of view. So if you're, for example, in the UK, you should probably know at least about the ones which I'm talking about now. If you were in French, I definitely recommend to join that French session we have on session 12 or 13. So this section or this specific lecture is more of an overview. I don't expect you all to know all these certifications in depth, so don't worry about that. But it's good to know what's out there at least. So yeah, continuing on where I was, the United Kingdom is quite a front runner also in the point of view from LCA or carbon studies, because the assessments they are doing there are quite extensive. So we of course have BREEAM UK. BREEAM originally comes from the UK, so they have been doing that there already for quite a long time. And the latest version of BREEAM UK we're doing right there is BREEAM UK 2018. We have also the impact database, which is used for benchmarking for certain BRAM-UK projects. And then we, of course, have the RICS and GLA carbon studies. So RICS and GLA are very comprehensive carbon studies, which include a lot. And they're one of the most interesting ones because they include almost everything. You then also have HQM, which is home quality mark, which is a specific scheme for residential buildings. GLA and RICS and BRAM UK will also be covered during session 11 by Joanna, our business developer management in the UK, who knows a lot about these schemes because she's been working with them for the last 20 years or so. There was one question, what about those of us in Africa? So in Africa, life cycle assessment is definitely not a priority. The only scheme that I am aware of is Green Star South Africa. And even though they also have much bigger problems than doing LCA at the moment. So maybe at some point it will become relevant, but when, it's very difficult to say. So continuing on, how do we assess these? BRAM UK and RICS, from a point of view of what we are doing, can be similar. So BRAM UK differs from BRAM International because you're not just doing one assessment. So in BRAM International, we're just reporting our carbon. To an extent, you're doing that as well in BRAM UK, but in BRAM UK, we do options. So we make different type of options. Let's say we compare 3 types of structure. We compare 3 types of hard landscaping, 3 types of building services. And the more options you do, the more points you get. But RICS and GLA, they are carbon studies. So the example that I'm showing you here is from our GLA tool, which can be used for both. First of all, the structure of it is already different because we are looking there specifically at the classification systems. So the main thing in RICS and GLA is that it's a carbon study. So we do global warming potential. We do it for a variety of different life cycle stages. So we can, for example, see that it also includes B1, it includes B2, it includes B3, which are normally excluded from most of the studies we are doing. And then it also differentiates this between regulated and unregulated energy. So basically any energy we can actively track and energy which is like to boil a kettle or something like this. Then it looks at a different type of classifications. So it does it based on the RICS classification. And it actually allows you, or it makes sure that you do 2 studies. So you first do your normal study, which is the base LCA, so to say. And then we are doing one, which is using a decarbonization profile. So this accounts for the fact that in 10, 20 years, 30 years, whenever materials might be replaced, the energy that is required to replace these materials or the energy that we're buying for the building won't be the same. So it uses some scenarios which are made by the UK government. This will be much more in-depth covered on that session on Monday. I think GLA is one of the most interesting schemes there is because it includes so much and you have to report on a lot. So you actually have to know something. Not that you don't have to know something with the other things, but you have to know more about the study at least. So yeah, very interesting scheme. If you're looking into carbon studies, definitely check out GLA. It's very cool. Then going on to the North American schemes. So there are no regulatory systems as of today. There are some things upcoming in certain states in the US, but nothing that is really in writing as of now. LEED is by far the most common voluntary certification which is done. And there are some local regulations upcoming as well, specifically in Canada. So very nice. If we are doing LEED in the US or LEED in North America, we of course have to first of all look at what kind of system are we using and what kind of data are we using. So LEED, the scope is always the same, structure and envelope, but depending on where we are using different type of data or we're calculating with a different type of unit system. In Canada, we do mostly metric when we do LEED, and in the US, we do imperial, and they have separate tools for them. In Canada, we also have the Canadian Green Building Council Zero Carbon tool, which you can do with any carbon tool in our software. So we have specific carbon tools for North America, specific one in metric and one in imperial, and you can use that for that one. The example I have here is an exam from our lead Canada tool, which is according to the Tracy system. So it accesses that North American data, but it's in metric units. And here it's the same, that you have to do this comparison to make sure that you get lower emissions. Then we go to Asia Pacific and African building certifications. So there isn't too much in this field. If you really want to find out all the systems which exist, which might be used or might not be used, or which are just an idea, I would recommend to check the embodied carbon review. Maybe one of our moderators can link it in the chat later. But basically we have Green Star there. So Green Star is a sustainability scheme which was originally made in Australia, which was adjusted to New Zealand as well, and later also adopted in South Africa. It is, from a point of view from certification, very similar to how BREEAM works. So you have multiple different type of categories where you can get credits for. LCA is one of them, and you cannot just do the LCA part. So you have to actually do more things together, and you get this certified rating for it. If you want to know more about specific this field, this certification, you can also click on the link, which takes you directly to the Australia GBC website, where they describe how Green Star works and whatnot. So if you want to know a bit more about it, definitely check that out. From an LCA point of view, again, like almost all of these tools, it of course has a minimum scope of materials. If you do the LCA for this, we have to include, for example, the structure on the envelope, and there's also some other elements in Green Star we have to include. This one also uses worldwide CML data. So in Australia, we also have quite a lot of CML data, and it also looks at more than just global warming potential. So as we see here, it also has the ozone depletion, acidification, eutrophication. I think the scope might actually be quite similar to what we do in BREEAM International from an LCA point of view. The energy profiles have to be aligned with this Green Star greenhouse gas emissions calculator. And it also has actually an additional section of results, which I'm not showing here, which, for example, also reports on human health toxicity. Only kind of downside is that they have added this extra session of results, but the majority of data in the world doesn't have data for that result section. So it doesn't make so much sense to have it there, but that's, I guess, their own choice. Then we go on to infrastructure. So infrastructure is something we haven't really covered here. It is, of course, just another type of LCA. You have building LCA, infrastructure LCA, product LCA, but there are also certifications you can pursue for infrastructure LCA. The ones to know at least there are SQL and Envision. So SQL and Envision are infrastructure schemes where we are doing whole building LCA. And we then also have PAS 2080, which is whole life carbon infrastructure LCA. Disregard what I said about building LCA there. So if we are looking at the input data button, which I've just put here so you can kind of compare it to what you see in the software right now, it looks a little bit different. So we do have, of course, our construction materials, which in our building tools would be the building materials. We have our construction site operations, and then we have separately use phase. Use phase is, of course, quite important for infrastructure because you might have cars driving on whatever infrastructure you're trying to do, or trains. We also have a calculation period, but it also has one extra section, earthworks and mass hauling. Usually if we do infrastructure projects, we don't have like a nice steady building site where we can already make our tunnel or we can make whatever we're trying to make there. First, we have to move a lot of earth and mass. That can also be quite significant from an emission point of view in infrastructure. When we look at the data used, most of the infrastructure tools use worldwide data and also generic data. Infrastructure is something which is not really mandatory yet. It would be great if it was mandatory in some countries because it can be quite a large part of the emissions. And getting credits kind of depends on what you're trying to do. So there's different type of credits we support with this. SQL, for example, is like a whole life building LCA, so has multiple indicators. Envision is similar, but the scope is a little bit more limited than SQL. HS2 is very complex calculations for the HS2 project in the UK. And PAS 2080 is a carbon tool, which is looking at just global warming potential. So this is how a result page, for example, from SQL looks like. We can see that to an extent, it's quite similar. We have also different type of indicators, similar to BREAM. We have the A1 to A3, which is kind of similar still, but then the transport is specifically split between the transport of our materials and any masses which have to be transported. And then we also have a bit more advanced section for the use phase. So it really looks at all the emissions which happen for that specific infrastructure project of a 60-year or 100-year period, or depending what we're looking at there. So to an extent, LCA result-wise, it's kind of same as building LCA, but of course you add different type of data there. You have different type of materials you're working with, you have different type of construction methods, so it can be a bit different. And then we have, of course, product certifications. So trying to get an EPD, for example. This kind of depends also on what we're trying to achieve here, but product LCA is quite different from building LCA. It is not as easy, or well, building LCA might also not be easy, but building LCA is not rocket science. Product LCA, you actually have to study quite a bit in order to do it, like, how do you say, comfortably and quick to that extent. So the input data button for what kind of data we're actually putting there is quite different there. So we don't look at our building materials only. We have, first of all, we start with some product description and declared units. So what are we actually calculating? Declared unit for building LCA is, for example, one building, but here it could be 1 kilogram of product or 1,000 kilograms or whatever. We separately look at all the different life cycle stages. So here it also kind of depends what are we trying to do. If we're trying to record an EPD according to the current EN system, which is the EN 15804A1, we just look at the A1 to A3. So we don't have to do anything else. But if this is according to the EN 15804A2, we also have to do the end of life. But we can do also a lot more. Manufacturers currently only have to do A1 to A3, but if they want, they can basically report everything. But also the type of data you put here can depend on quite a lot of different things, like local standards, product category rules. You cannot just use any data, like what I had listed here. In our product LCA tools, you have access to worldwide EPDs, but you cannot use all of them to just generate data. And you, of course, have eco-event lifecycle inventory data, which we can use. So product LCA is, well, it's probably worth another whole summer school with 15 sessions or something, because it's just a completely different type of LCA. We're actually looking into maybe doing a product LCA summer school also, or fall school, or whatever you want to call it. But it's definitely a different world from what we're trying to do here. If we're also inputting that, for example, the results section, if we're doing building LCA, you might have just one set of results. It could just have your normal certifications like what you had for BREAM or whatnot. So kind of like this. So just one set of results. But if we're doing product LCA, we need much more. So we could also have the EN A2 standards, use of natural resources, waste, outputs, all these kind of things. So the whole scope of what we're trying to assess, it's much, much, much broader. To compare how easy it is to learn this, if I am training a normal client who has some experience with building LCA, I can train them in 1.5 hours to do a BREAM or lead assessment. Maybe if it's a bit more advanced, 3 hours. If we're doing product LCA and I'm training the same client on how to do product LCA, it could be a day or 2 days, depending on how much time it takes, really. So it's quite different process. Then I now have some examples of case studies which have been done with our software, which you can check on our website. I'll just highlight them, and then I can talk about some Q&A parts. So first of all, if you're on our website and you go to the resources tab, so in the beginning, I've discussed shortly the software and the use case tab, but we also have resources. You can click there on customer stories. We have a bunch of different type of resources there. But what could be most interesting is perhaps the certification stories or the carbon expert stories. So if we would click here on library case studies, you go here and you can sort through all the different type of elements. So basically the case studies we have listed there are basically LCA projects which have gotten one of the highest ratings what they could have gotten. So in Braham, they could have gotten the excellent, or in lead, they could have gotten platinum, or yeah, these kind of things basically. So for Braham, there were 3 case studies which I've highlighted here, which you can also click right away by clicking on these. And they are quite nice projects which have gotten, I think, what lead have they gotten? Excellent, probably, or something. Not 100% sure anymore. But yeah, check them out if you want. They are quite cool projects, which have really reduced the emissions on different type of fields to make sure they have gotten these credits. There are also a lot of lead case studies. So there's, for example, this one office from India, which was the first lead platinum, and I think the second first lead platinum project in India, and the second lead platinum project for that group in that type of building typology, I mean, in Asia. And then there are some other quite cool projects you can check there as well. So there are usually projects which have gone beyond on what they're trying to get. I think with this L'Oreal project, for example, it was an industrial hall in, I would say Russia, but it might be somewhere else, which first of all targeted lead silver, but they actually managed to get lead platinum. So they did much better than what they have targeted. There's also 2 Dgmb case studies for those who are interested in that. One, the Knauf Experience Center was a quite interesting one, which uses really interesting materials. And then there was also one hotel in Spain, I guess, which got Dgmb platinum. One thing that I also would like to highlight is the Carbon Expert of the Month series. So probably since a bit over a year, we have interviewed one of our clients every month on exactly how they are using One Click Lca and how they are decarbonizing the global construction industry. So if you go to Library Case Studies and you go to Carbon Expert of the Month, you'll find all kinds of people who are actively using LCA or carbon or One Click Lca for that matter, pretty much on a daily basis. So these could be consultants, but they could also be project managers or department heads or whatnot. So basically people who are actively every day trying to reduce global building emissions. So a lot of really interesting stories and why they have joined, how they're using One Click Lca or specific projects they are really proud of. So I would definitely recommend to check that one. Then now it would be time for the Q&A part. I think I finished quite on time, but there's one thing I just quickly wanted to highlight, and that is our career page. So I have already talked with some of you throughout the summer school who have approached me for positions, and I would always like to remind, go to our website and check the career page. So we are constantly growing as a company. LCA is becoming much more important. So we need a lot of people who can do LCA or who can support us in different type of sections of the market. Specifically right now, I think one of the groups which is very important is our North America business developers. So if you're in North America, you're interested in this kind of position to understand LCA, how to sell LCA and make sure that as many people do LCA, definitely check out those positions. There's a couple of positions we haven't officially opened yet, but if you already want to apply to them, you can send an email to careers. And in generally, if you think you're a good fit with our company, you are passionate about sustainability, hopefully specifically life cycle assessment, and you think you would fit well with any of the teams, just send us an open application as well. We are always eager to talk to enthusiastic people on these things. Then now I can answer some more questions. Oh. I'll just start with the top question. Marina asked if there's internships in One Click Lca. We do indeed offer internships as well. I'm not sure if there's any open right now, but at least usually for the summer, we have a bunch of internships. Dima asked, where can we find the exam information? So the exam information will be announced further tomorrow, but maybe I can just highlight this one link. So if you cannot join the exam on Friday, you have to go to the Summer School Resource Hub and you have to fill in this form. So the idea is with the summer school that we try to get as many people throughout the original exam session. So that's on Friday. normal times like what we have today, and then you'll have an hour to do the exam. And then if there's any issues, we can just help you throughout the exam as well. We'll just be available as moderators like now. But there are, of course, some of you who are in different time zones. Maybe you're in Australia or US, or for whatever reason, you cannot join on Friday. So if you are part of those groups that you cannot join, please register here. And I will make sure that you get a link that you can take the exam anywhere during the next week at a time of your own choosing. So I'm kind of like trusting that you don't share this with other people then, of course. But of course, we want to have as many people pass this exam. Tomorrow will be the recap session. So I'll really be covering everything which I know is important for the exam. So if you can at least watch the recap session, you'll probably have quite a lot of information on what is there. I didn't provide the example questions yet, but I'll see if I can give you some tomorrow, because that should be possible. There is some question if there's extra time if you have a learning disability. Yeah, that is probably no problem. Maybe just to be sure, I would sign up for this link I have here. I have just put the link in the chat as well. An anonymous attendee asked, where can I access all the CML indicators as we have all? So the CML indicators which matter are available in the lifecycle assessment tool in the summer school license. So basically, if you are on our help center, let me just go there and you search for impact assessment categories. This one, it will talk about the relevant CML indicators. Zulal asked if there's going to be a specific software we have to download for the exam. No, you don't. It will be with a Google form. It's quite easy to use. There is a question if there are any plans to include well or fit well guidelines into One Click Lca. Not as of today, but maybe in the future. Miko asks, do you think that BRAM or LEED will be a suitable certification scheme for publicly owned property or buildings? Are they serving mainly private real estate investors or ESG perspective? They could be used for both. Yeah, I don't see why not, but publicly owned usually has a bit higher requirements, I would assume. So I'm not sure if BRAM would meet these requirements. LEED might if you are targeting certain things. For example, not sure if you're actually from Finland, but the bigger malls which have been recently built, the Ready and the Tripla Mall, they are both LEED Platinum certified. Miko asks if we support CRASB. So if you go to our website and you check the section for greenhouse gas reporting, you'll find your answer there, which is here. There will be that type of information. I won't ask about the GHG reporting, so don't worry. Could the number of credits of each scheme be something that might be in the exam? I don't think I will ask such detailed questions about the credits. You might want to check what are the basic credits at least for BRAM and LEED though. But I'll see if I can give you some kind of overview tomorrow, so you can prepare for it a bit more. Venkatesh asked, will the internship availability be published on the career page or only on the jobs? I'm pretty sure that we publish the internships on the same page. So if you go to our company page, you just go to careers, and it usually also has the internships there. I'm just not sure when the next internship starts, so I do not know. An anonymous attendee asks, who provides the thresholds of ton CO2 equivalent per square meter for Dgmb? So the values, the reference values for Dgmb you can get from the Dgmb guidance. Who has made them? I don't know, probably some Dgmb experts. Dylan asks, what certification would you recommend for the Caribbean? So we have a couple of clients who do LCA in the Caribbean, and I'm pretty sure they do lead. But LCA in the Caribbean is a bit tricky because you have to import a lot of materials, which basically means that the majority of your emissions are going to be from transport. So yeah, I think lead would probably be most relevant for Caribbean. Samson asks if there's any LCA career opportunities in Poland. We often hire for remote positions. Not sure if we have staff in Poland right now, but if there is some position on the career page that you look interesting and you're in Poland and you'll be a good fit, then you could apply for it for sure. Luciana asks, what is parametric LCA like Rhino? What is the difference between One Click Lca? So in parametric LCA, you can do the optimization a bit faster. So you can do it right, basically on the go. You change something, you get new results. You change something, you get new results, like without doing the LCA part in our software, perhaps. Dieter asks, could we have access to the recordings for 90 days to assist in practice of LCA? And for how long do we have the software? So access to the software is until the end of this month, but we could probably have the recordings online for 90 days. I don't see why we couldn't. Actually, one of my colleagues just pointed out we have one of my colleagues who's working in Poland, so might be possible. Uni Christian asks you, talks about opportunities in the US. What about mainland Europe or Ireland? I mean, most of our staff is in mainland Europe. We're of course a Finnish company, but we have 25 nationalities, I think. So mainland Europe, there's always opportunities. Ashfant asks, how will the use of the software be examined in the exam? So I will ask you about how certain features work. So I could, for example, be asking you how would you replace a material in the easiest way or something like this. And of course, I have shown these type of features in the software trainings before. Or where do you get your results? How do you change? How do you use the filter settings? These kind of things. So I will definitely be asking practical questions about the use of One Click Lca, because I'm trying to teach you guys how to do building LCA carbon studies, but I'm also trying to teach you how to do it with our software, of course. Suganya asked, are there any certification schemes in India? That is a very good question. I do not have an answer for you right now. I know there are some schemes, but I'm not sure if they are like our LCA schemes. I know that, for example, in Vietnam, you have the Lotus scheme. In Singapore, you have a green building scheme. I'm not 100% sure about India. We have quite a lot of clients from India, so it's possible that they have something. One of my colleagues also mentions that most of the clients we have in India, they are doing lead. Griha. Okay, I'm not familiar myself with Griha. Dylan asks, any opportunities for those in the Caribbean? Honestly, not sure right now. I mean, if they're like the majority of the new roles we are opening anyway, they are remote based. With this whole COVID period, remote working is kind of like the new standard now. So if there is a position that would meet what you're looking for and you're in the Caribbean, I don't see it as a problem. What time does the exam start on Friday? The exam will start probably 15 minutes or so after I've started the session. So just wait until everybody comes in. If there's some questions, I can still answer them beforehand, and then I'll share the link so everybody can do the exam. Is there any certification for the Middle East? There definitely are some certifications, but none are regulatory. So they are kind of more like voluntary certifications. The majority of clients we have in the Middle East are doing lead. Venkatesh has a question about modifying concrete timber frame. I'm not able to see any difference in results. How could I make best use of changing frame type and LCA design options? If you're doing this through Carbon Designer, don't forget to resave your query after you have made a change. So if you, for example, have your first design, which is concrete, you have made a copy of it, change that one to timber, make sure you save it, and then it will show the differences. If you have some issues with it, just send us an email to support and we can look at it, of course. There's a question from Pippa. Throughout the sessions, there have been numerous times where you have suggested to click on a link and read more about the particular aspect. Will be expected to have further knowledge? No, you won't. So I'm just putting the links in the PowerPoint, so you kind of know what I'm talking about. And if you want to know more, you can go to them. Some of them go to, for example, Green Building Council websites or certifications. It's more if you're interested in it, you can take a look at it. It's not that you have to know all the links that I'm sharing, so don't worry. Camille asks, hi, during the exam, will we have access to use, or will we have to use One Click Lca tools, or are the questions focused on what we presented in the PowerPoints? Yeah, you don't have to use One Click Lca throughout the exam. I mean, you're free to do it. To that extent, it's kind of like an open book exam. You can have the PowerPoints, you can have the software, but you'll be able to answer the questions from what I have shared in the PowerPoints and what I've talked about. Samson asks, is it possible to publish a journal in One Click Lca? I'm not sure, but you could send us an email and we can look at that. Abdullah asks, do you think infrastructure has less regulations for embodied carbon because there are very limited options to replace fossil fuel equipment used extensively there? There are definitely options to replace fossil fuel options there, but could be the case. I think it's just one of those sectors because it's kind of government controlled everywhere. The private market might not have so much influence on it. I'm not sure. I'm not the infrastructure expert, unfortunately, so cannot really answer too good. Sorry. Luciana says, to what degree do any of these standards align to achieving 1.5 Celsius net zero targets? If you mean not heating up the world, I mean, 39% of global global warming emissions worldwide are coming from the construction industry. So if we can eliminate 39% of those emissions, or 35% or whatever, obviously it will help make sure that we don't all burn. Anonymous attendee asks, I came in quite late, but did Stephen already discuss any new updates about the exam? So yeah, as you can see on the screen right now, if you cannot make it in the exam on Friday, you can register or put your name and your email there, and we'll make sure that you somehow get a link that you can do it anywhere between the 13th and the 20th. So at some point that you want yourself. Asfand asked, can you elaborate point 2? Not really sure what I said in point 2 anymore. Could you put it in the chat? I can answer then. Luke Schneider asks, is there any work on including organizational LCA into the software in the future? If you mean greenhouse gas reporting, we already have modules for that. I just haven't covered it in depth in our software, but you can record all the emissions for greenhouse gas reporting. Like this tells you basically that. So we are probably not going to, like, or how do you want to say it? Like, our greenhouse gas reporting tool is designed for people who are working in the construction industry. So that is, of course, where our specialization lies. Samson asked, what is the pass mark for the exam? I had set it to 90%. I'm confident that you will pass it. An anonymous attendee asked, do you recruit people to work part-time? We do have part-time positions also. I'm not sure if we have one open right now, though. Definitely recommend to check that careers page, which I had linked earlier. Careers, right there. Where can we get the slides for this session? The slides are already available on the Summer School Hub. So I'll link it again in the chat. So every day we have the slides available right there. See, my slides are already there, but the recording obviously will be there in a bit after this session. Dieter says, when you say support is available Friday only, what sort of support do you mean? What I mean with that is that our intention is that you do the exam in the allocated time slot on Friday. So I will be available to talk, or well, I probably won't talk to you throughout the exam itself, but we'll be available in the chat to answer any questions if there's something wrong. The days after that, if you want to do the exam at another point in time, of course, we don't have live support. So maybe the answer is more, if you do your exam on Friday, next Friday, there will be live support if there's anything wrong. An anonymous attendee asked, do we need to log into Zoom when the exam is, or can it be accessed directly? I will be sharing the link in Zoom throughout the meeting. So probably would be better if you can log into Zoom. Another question from an anonymous attendee. I think I already answered this. If I have shared a link, if you have to know more about what I shared there specifically, no, you don't. It's more for extra information. So I'm trying to teach you how to do building LCA, but also kind of teaching you all the little fine aspects of, okay, maybe this is interesting to know. That is good to know. This would help you later. Like if you want to become a professional in it, it definitely helps to be up to date on a lot of things. But you don't have to know everything. Don't worry. Only we are the ones who have to know everything. Ronnie asks, I already registered for a new slot for the exam. I just hope it's in midday. So basically, if you register for the exam throughout that link, you get a link that basically allows you to do it whenever you want through before a certain period. So it's not really possible for us to host like 10 different exam times or something. We're not that big of a company either. Thomas asks, would a thing like indoor climate be something that would be beneficial to include in One Click Lca at one point? Maybe. Indoor climate is something which is more considered in energy modeling, but it is possible that we have something like that at some point. Like, does One Click Lca offer GHG inventory accounting? So you can do GHG reporting with our corporate tools we have there. So I won't cover it in this session, but it is possible. Anonymous question asks, I haven't come across any internship on the page recently. I even wrote HR about it, no luck. Yeah, it might be that we don't have any published right now, but we have a lot of positions normally open throughout the year. So just keep an eye on it. I cannot do much there either now. Just try to learn as much as possible about building LCA. It will always better your chances of getting an internship. Yeah, as Abdullah and Thomas now already said, if you're doing the exam on Friday, you don't have to register. So the registration is only if you cannot make it to the exam on Friday. Anonymous attendee asks, what most background qualifications should to be involved with One Click Lca and what specific GPA matters? I don't think your GPA really matters. We are looking for people who are very enthusiastic about sustainability. For certain roles, obviously, you'll need some experience. Like if we hire for an EPD expert, probably you'll need like 5 years of EPD, actual practical EPD experience or these kind of things. Like I cannot really tell you right now. For trying to hire a French-speaking person, you probably should know French. It very much depends on the position. I cannot answer that right now. Fab asks, I am unsure about this, but both Japan and South Korea have their own certifications that include LCA. Is One Click Lca expanding on the front of providing certification systems for other countries as well? Students in Korea, for example, would greatly benefit from it. If it is feasible for us to do so, definitely. I know that we have clients in Korea and in Japan who are doing BREEAM and LEED. I'm not sure if they're doing anything else, but Yeah, it is possible. Of course, language-wise, Korea and Japan are kind of tricky. Like we also have Japanese EPDs in our database, which are not as easy to integrate as normal EPDs. But like in Korea and Japan, there are no there's no regulatory system for LCA. So unless a lot of people are doing it, it might be too difficult to enter if you're not Korean or Japanese. Marina asks, are there credit points associated with certification important for the exam? Is it knowledge-based? I'm not going to ask about specific credits, but I would recommend to at least know about the credit requirements for BREAM and LEED, specifically the LCA related ones. So in BREAM, you have your MAT 01, and in LEED, you have your MRC. So maybe I'll highlight this. If I go to our help center, we have here the BREAM International. You have the MAT 01, most important one in this aspect. And for LEED, we have the MRC one, most important one, or maybe the 4.1. Dieter asks, I use Safari. Will I be able to exit the exam via Safari? I think if you can open Google in Safari, you can probably open it. Yeah. Anonymous question, how long have I been with One Click Lca? Probably like 3.5 years-ish. Samson asks, how can I know if our project meets LEED or BREAM certification? Is embodied benchmark means LEED or BREAM certification? Please enlighten more on this. So LEED certification you can achieve if you, no worries, Guy. LEED certification you can achieve if you reach certain targets. So if you have, for example, reduced your emissions by 10%, check this one, by the way, you can reach, for example, LEED silver or whatnot, depending on what you're trying to get. In BREAM, you can get certification if you record or if you report on certain values. So if we, for example, have done an LCA for BREAM International, where we have included the mandatory materials, we can already get credits. And that is covered more in the BREAM session on Monday. Is there an office located in the UK? We indeed have an office in the UK. Anonymous attendee asked, does specific range years of previous experience works? Is metaphor selection careers? Depends completely on the job. We do also hire for junior jobs, and we are not the type of persons who are saying, okay, we're hiring a junior job and you have to have 5 years of experience. Junior is junior, so that means fresh graduate. If we do hire for experts, obviously would probably put in the thing that you need like 5 years experience or whatnot. We are quite clear in what we're asking for. And we do hire a lot of juniors also. There's a lot of people who are junior in this. Does One Click Lca have some integration tools related with ESG rating for their clients? I'm not sure what an ESG rating is. Could you elaborate on it in the chat? Shagaye, hope I pronounced it correctly, asked, do we need to use One Click Lca for calculating something in the exam? No, you don't. If you have watched all the recordings and basically are following what I've been trying to explain, then you should be able to answer everything, okay? There's 2 questions regarding the thing, what happens if you fail the exam? You'll be able to retake it at least once. Tatiana asked, is that a way to combine the same resources and have one quantity value on the building materials tab? Perhaps you mean that you can use the grouping feature to have one construction which has one value. What is the team size of One Click Lca? I think we have 60 staff right now. Can we retake the exam? Yeah, you'll be able to retake it. Noel asks, whether our embodied carbon benchmarking regulatory requirements, I assume they are lowered over time. What would be the normal period of threshold review? I think these periods are going to be shorter and shorter because we are really having to change stuff. But it depends on the country, I guess. I know that in the Netherlands, they changed the requirement for €1 per square meter after like 2 years to become 0.80 cents. So it depends on the country. I guess if a country is ahead with getting their climate goals, they might be able to relax a bit more on reviewing the threshold reviews. But if they're really far behind, they might have to really boost up and set much stronger requirements. Thomas asks, can one combine being an architect with being employed at One Click Lca? I guess if there's a part-time position, it would be possible. I'm not sure. Venkatesh, I've seen you join pretty much all the sessions. I'm confident you will pass it. Should be no problem. Environmental social governance. I'm not sure if we do anything we did as of today, but it could be possible we do in the future. Is the software used in the exam? You don't have to use the software throughout the exam. Don't worry about that. Was One Click Lca a startup? What is the history of the company? Do we have some information on the history of the company? I'm not sure if we do. Let's see. But of course, Lca at some point, our company at some point was a startup, but it is not anymore. Anonymous attendees asked how many times we can retake the exam. Honestly, I haven't considered it too much. I would say if you somehow fail the exam, you just let us know and we'll try to see if we can do something. Tatiana asks, after checking the reused material, do I need to keep the values stable to transportation? How would that would relate to the maintenance? So if you have materials which you have reused, but they were already on site, so perhaps you're reusing existing parts of the previous building, obviously these won't have transportation emissions. So you can just remove the transportation, set it to 0. There's a question, can one buy stocks for One Click Lca? It's privately owned, unfortunately. Maybe in the future, but if you are no longer privately owned, it kind of restricts what you can actually do. And if we actually want to change stuff, it's probably better that the company stays privately owned. Anonymous attendee asked that the list of careers was larger than what we have on the website. It's correct, because some of the positions there we haven't put on the website yet, but I was asked to already share them. So you can already apply for these, but if you think you're generally a good fit with any position in the company, you can also send an open application. Who are your competitors? Ashwan, I would recommend to check the slides from session 2 or session 1. I'm not really sure, but in one of them, there's a slide which has all the competitors as well. So you can exactly see where we are in the whole grand scale of things. And there's a question, do you have an office or operations in Spain? And it's so, which cities? I wish we had an office in Spain because I would love to be in the sun there, but we don't have one as of today. Question, how do you book the exam on Friday? If you intend to join the exam on Friday, you don't have to book anything. So that link that I shared in the beginning, what was it? No, here, this one. It's only if you cannot make it to the one on Friday. And there will be resets for sure. I think I've then answered all the questions. If there's still some questions I can answer for 1 or 2. Thank you all for joining today. There's one more question. Do you have plans to expand to all forms of LCA? We definitely plan to specialize in the construction industry because it's a very tangible thing we can influence, but it might be possible. Like, I don't know, maybe. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining. See you guys tomorrow in the recap session. Bye-bye.